The crimson dawn painted the rolling hills of Lusk, Wyoming with fire as 20-year-old Temperance Porter stood frozen on her family's porch, clutching the letter that had arrived from Boston, the letter that sealed her fate without her consent. Her hands trembled as she reread the words, each one driving a spike deeper into her heart. An arranged marriage to a wealthy businessman she'd never met, a man 3 times her age who'd agreed to save her family's ranch from financial ruin in exchange for a young bride. The year was 1878, and women had few choices in life, especially women whose fathers gambled away their inheritance and drank themselves into debt. Temperance's mother had passed 3 winters ago, leaving her to manage both the failing ranch and her father's deteriorating health. The drought had claimed most of their cattle, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. "Papa, you cannot be serious," Temperance said, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her as she entered the small ranch house. Harold Porter looked up from his whiskey glass, his once handsome face now weathered and gaunt. "It's done, Temp. Mr. Bartholomew will be here in 3 weeks to collect you. The papers are signed. He's paid off our debts and sent enough for a train ticket to take me to Denver for treatment." "So you've sold me like livestock." The words tasted bitter on her tongue. Her father couldn't meet her gaze. "You'll have a good life in Boston, fine clothes, servants, everything I couldn't give you." "I never asked for those things. This is my home." She gestured to the modest ranch that stretched toward the horizon. "These are my skies. This is where Mother is buried. And this is where we'll both be buried if something doesn't change." He slammed his glass down. "I'm dying, Temperance. The doctor says my lungs won't last another year." "What will happen to you then? An unmarried woman with a worthless piece of land." Temperance turned away, tears stinging her eyes. The letter crumpled in her hand as she retreated to her room. She knew her father was right about one thing: her prospects in Lusk were limited. But to be shipped off to Boston as a purchased bride, the thought made her stomach turn. That night, sleep eluded her. She sat by her window, watching the stars that seemed to mock her with their freedom. By morning, Temperance had made a decision. If she had to leave Lusk, it would be on her own terms. She would go to Cheyenne, find work as a teacher or seamstress, anything that would allow her to maintain her dignity. Before dawn, she packed her mother's silver hairbrush, a few dresses, and what little money she had saved. She scribbled a note to her father, promising to send for him once she was settled. With one last look at the only home she'd ever known, Temperance slipped into the dusty yard, heading for the stables. The old mare, Willow, nickered softly as Temperance saddled her. "It's just you and me now, girl," she whispered, patting the horse's neck. "We need to make it to the stage-coach station by noon." The journey would take her through Rawhide Creek, a dangerous stretch known for bandits and worse. But staying meant surrendering her life to a stranger's hands. She'd rather face the dangers of the trail than the certainty of a loveless marriage. As the sun climbed higher, Temperance pushed Willow harder, the distant silhouette of the creek appearing on the horizon. The familiar landscape of her childhood was passing away, perhaps forever, and despite her resolve, tears blurred her vision. She brushed them away angrily. There was no time for weeping. The sound of hoofbeats approaching from behind made her heart race. Had her father discovered her absence so soon? She urged Willow off the trail, seeking cover behind a stand of cottonwoods. Through the branches, she glimpsed a lone rider, tall and broad-shouldered, his black hat pulled low over his face. Not her father, but a stranger. Temperance held her breath as he passed her hiding place, then let out a gasp as Willow snorted loudly. The rider reined in sharply, turning toward the sound. Temperance had no choice but to emerge from her concealment, her hand instinctively reaching for the small pistol in her saddlebag. "Whoa there, miss," the stranger called, raising his hands to show they were empty. "Don't mean to startle you, just passing through." As he lifted his face, Temperance found herself looking into the bluest eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard. He couldn't be much older than 25, and despite his trail-worn appearance, there was something in his easy posture that spoke of confidence rather than threat. "Are you heading toward Lusk?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of Texas drawl. Temperance straightened her spine. "I'm traveling in the opposite direction, to Cheyenne." He raised an eyebrow. "Alone? That's mighty dangerous country for a solitary lady." "I'm capable of handling myself, sir." She kept her tone cool, though her heart was pounding. "And I'm expected at the stage-coach station shortly." A lie, but he needn't know that. The stranger studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Name's Ross Prescott. I was heading to Lusk myself, but I reckon Cheyenne's as good a destination as any." He tipped his hat. "Mind if I ride alongside you?" These parts aren't friendly to lone travelers of any sort. Temperance hesitated. She didn't know this man, but there was something in his straightforward manner that seemed trustworthy. And if bandits did appear, having a companion, especially one wearing a gun belt that looked well used, might prove advantageous. "Very well, Mr. Prescott, but I set the pace." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Yes, madam." They rode in silence for several miles, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a steady counterpoint to Temperance's racing thoughts. She could feel Ross Prescott's occasional glances, but kept her own eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "So what takes you to Cheyenne in such a hurry?" he finally asked, breaking the silence. "Personal matters, running to something or away from something." Temperance shot him a sharp look. "That's a presumptuous question, Mr. Prescott. Just making conversation." He shrugged, but his eyes were knowing. "Most folks with honest business don't hide in the trees when another rider approaches." She flushed. "I'm not accustomed to encountering strangers on lonely trails." "Fair enough." He nodded toward the horizon where dark clouds were gathering. "Storm's coming." "We should make for shelter before it hits." Temperance frowned. "The stage-coach station is still 4 hours' ride, and that storm will catch us in 2. Ross pointed to a ridge to their right. "There's an old line shack about a mile that way. Used it myself last season while moving cattle. It ain't fancy, but it's dry." Temperance weighed her options. Getting caught in a Wyoming thunderstorm could be deadly. Her pride rebelled at the idea of taking shelter alone with this stranger, but her practical nature won out. "Very well," she conceded. "Lead the way." The line shack was little more than a one-room cabin with a sagging roof, but it was sturdy enough to withstand the approaching storm. Ross unsaddled the horses and led them into the lean-to attached to the back, while Temperance examined the interior. A rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot were the only furnishings. Dust covered everything, but there was a small stack of firewood beside the stone fireplace. Temperance busied herself sweeping the worst of the dirt away with a bundle of dried grasses she found in the corner. Ross returned, carrying his saddlebags and rifle. "It'll be tight quarters, but better than being drenched." He glanced at her work. "You're making it downright homey." "Cleanliness is a virtue, Mr. Prescott. So my mama always said." He said about starting a fire. "Got some coffee and jerky in my bags. Not much of a supper, but it'll keep body and soul together." The storm broke just as they'd settled in, rain lashing against the small windows and wind howling through the cracks in the walls. Despite the conditions, Temperance found herself relaxing as they shared the simple meal. There was something comforting about Ross's quiet competence, the way he moved with assurance in the small space, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "You know these lands well," she observed as lightning illuminated the cabin. Ross nodded, sipping his coffee. Been working as a trail boss, moving herds from Texas up to Wyoming and Montana. Seen most of the territory between here and the Rio Grande. And what brings you to Lusk specifically? He hesitated, as if weighing his words. Looking for a fresh start. Heard there might be a ranch for sale that needs fixing up. Temperance's heart skipped. There aren't many properties available in Lusk. This one belongs to a fella named Porter. Word is he's in financial trouble, might be willing to sell cheap. The coffee cup nearly slipped from Temperance's fingers. How did you hear of this? Ross studied her reaction with interest. Bank manager in Cheyenne mentioned it when I was asking about land. Said the daughter was being shipped off to Boston and the old man was headed for a sanatorium in Denver. He tilted his head. You know the place? Temperance set down her cup carefully. I am Temperance Porter. Ross's eyes widened. Well now, that explains the hasty departure. He leaned forward. Mind telling me what you're running from, Miss Porter? For real this time? She hesitated, but what did it matter now? My father arranged a marriage for me to settle his debts. A man in Boston, old enough to be my grandfather. I refuse to be traded like cattle. So you're heading to Cheyenne to find work, make my own way. She lifted her chin. I may be a woman, Mr. Prescott, but I have a mind and two capable hands. Ross nodded slowly. And what of your father? What happens to him and the ranch? He's ill consumption. The marriage arrangement included money for his medical treatment. Temperance's voice faltered. I left him a note. Once I'm established, I'll send for him. That's a hard road you're choosing. Harder than being some old man's purchase. Fair point. Ross studied the fire. But Cheyenne's a rough town for a woman alone. I have few alternatives. The storm raged through the night, forcing them to share the small cabin until morning. Ross insisted Temperance take the cot while he spread his bedroll near the fire. Despite her misgivings, she slept soundly, exhausted from the emotional strain of the day. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Ross had ventured out at first light, checking snares he'd set the previous evening and returning with 2 rabbits. Now he stood at the crude stove, cooking breakfast as if this were the most natural situation in the world. Storms passed, he said when he noticed her watching. But the creek's running high. We'll need to find another crossing. Temperance sat up, smoothing her rumpled dress. You seem to have thought this through. Been in worse spots. He handed her a tin plate of food. Eat up. We've got a long ride ahead. She accepted the plate, her fingers brushing his. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her. Thank you. They ate in companionable silence, then set about packing up their few belongings. As Temperance folded the blanket from the cot, she caught Ross watching her with an unreadable expression. What is it? She asked. He seemed to come to some decision. I've been thinking about your situation. I might have a proposition for you. Temperance tensed. Mr. Prescott, if you're suggesting nothing improper, he assured her quickly. Hear me out. I came to Wyoming looking for a ranch to buy. You have a ranch you're being forced to abandon. Seems to me there might be a way to solve both our problems. My father has already accepted money from Mr. Bartholomew. The ranch isn't his to sell anymore. Has the deed been transferred? Temperance frowned. I don't believe so. The agreement was that it would happen after the marriage. Then it's still legally your father's property. Ross leaned against the table. What if I were to match Bartholomew's offer? Pay off your father's debts, provide for his medical care, but without the personal requirements. Why would you do that? Suspicion colored her voice. Because I need a ranch, and from what I've heard, the Porter property has good water rights and grazing land. It's undervalued because of your father's mismanagement. Ross held her gaze steadily. This is a business proposition, Miss Porter, nothing more. Temperance considered his words. It seemed too convenient, too perfect a solution to have simply fallen into her lap. And what would happen to me in this arrangement? That would be your choice. You could take your share and go to Cheyenne as planned, or, he hesitated, you could stay on as a partner. You know the land, the cattle, the local markets. That knowledge is valuable. A partner. Temperance couldn't hide her surprise. Women don't typically hold such positions. I'm not much for typically. Ross smiled. My mother ran our family ranch for 15 years after my father died. Taught me everything I know about cattle and a good deal about people too. Temperance's mind raced with possibilities. To save the ranch, provide for her father, and maintain her independence, it seemed impossible. Yet this stranger was offering her exactly that. This is unexpected. I need time to consider. Of course, Ross nodded, but we should head back to Lusk soon if we want to catch your father before he sends out a search party. The ride back to Lusk was faster than Temperance's flight from it had been. They forded the swollen creek at a wider crossing Ross knew of, then made good time across the prairie. The storm had left the air clean and the grass glistening. Despite her uncertainty about Ross's proposition, Temperance felt her spirits lifting with each mile that brought them closer to home. Ross spoke little during the journey, giving her space to think. When they crested the final rise that overlooked the Porter ranch, Temperance reined in her horse, taking in the familiar sight of the whitewashed farmhouse, the weathered barn, and the corrals where she'd learned to ride as a child. It's not much, she said softly, but it's been in our family for 2 generations. Ross surveyed the property with a practiced eye. Good placement, protected from the north winds, close to water. Your grandfather chose well. He built that house with his own hands after bringing my grandmother out from Pennsylvania. Pride warmed her voice. She taught school in the front room until they built the schoolhouse in town. Sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. Temperance straightened her shoulders. Mr. Prescott, before we go any further, I need your word that this isn't some elaborate scheme to take advantage of our situation. Ross met her gaze directly. Miss Porter, I give you my word as a Prescott that my offer is genuine. Business, plain and simple. Your father can confirm my references with the bank in Cheyenne if he wishes. Something in his steady look convinced her. Very well. Let's speak with my father. Harold Porter was sitting on the porch when they rode in, a rifle across his knees. His face, haggard with worry, transformed to relief when he saw his daughter, then clouded with anger. Temperance Mary Porter, where in God's name have you been? He struggled to his feet, coughing into a handkerchief. And who the devil is this? Temperance dismounted, approaching her father cautiously. Papa, this is Mr. Ross Prescott. He assisted me when I got caught in the storm yesterday. Ross tipped his hat respectfully. Mr. Porter, your daughter speaks highly of you. Harold's suspicious gaze shifted between them. Does she now? Strange, considering she ran off without so much as a goodbye. I left a note, Temperance said quietly, and I've returned, as you see. To pack your things for Boston, I hope. Harold's voice was hard. Mr. Bartholomew's lawyer sent word. He'll be arriving next week instead of 3 weeks from now, eager to claim his bride, it seems. Ross stepped forward. Sir, if I might have a word with you about that matter, I believe I have an alternative proposition that might interest you. Harold glared at him. This doesn't concern you, stranger. It does if I'm offering to buy your ranch for a fair price, enough to cover your debts and your medical expenses in Denver. Temperance watched her father's expression shift from hostility to wary interest. Papa, please listen to what Mr. Prescott has to say. For my sake. Inside the house, seated at the kitchen table where generations of Porters had taken their meals, Ross laid out his proposal. He would purchase the ranch at market value, paying off the bank loans immediately. Harold would receive enough money for his treatment, plus a small stipend to live on afterward. "And what of my daughter?" Harold asked, eyeing Ross suspiciously. "Is she part of this bargain too?" "No, sir." Ross's voice was firm. "Miss Porter is free to make her own choices. However, I've suggested she might consider staying on as a partner in the operation, given her knowledge of the property and the business." Harold snorted. "Partner? A woman? A capable woman who's been running this ranch while you've been?" Ross paused diplomatically, indisposed. Temperance held her breath as her father absorbed this subtle rebuke. To her surprise, shame rather than anger crossed his face. "It's true enough," Harold admitted grudgingly. "Temp's got a head for figures and knows every inch of this land." He turned to his daughter. "But is this what you want? To stay here rather than have the life a lady deserves?" "Boston holds nothing for me, Papa. This land, this life, it's in my blood as much as yours." Temperance reached for his hand. "And this way you'll get the treatment you need without sacrificing my happiness." Harold studied Ross again. "You can provide references, prove you have the funds." "Yes, sir. I have letters from the Continental Bank of Cheyenne and my previous employers in Texas. The funds are already deposited, ready to transfer." "And what about Bartholomew? I've signed papers, given my word." Ross leaned forward. "No offense, sir, but selling a human being isn't legally binding, not even a daughter. If you return his deposit with interest, he has no recourse. He won't be happy." "Perhaps not, but I doubt he wants an unwilling bride badly enough to make a public spectacle of it." Harold considered this, then looked at Temperance. The love she'd always known was there in his eyes, buried beneath years of grief and whiskey but not extinguished. "You really want this, Temp?" "I do, Papa, more than anything." He nodded slowly. "Then I reckon we'd better see those references, Mr. Prescott, and draw up some proper papers." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Ross rode into town to wire the bank in Cheyenne, confirming his financial standing. The local lawyer, Mr. Simmons, was summoned to draft the sale agreement and the partnership contract between Ross and Temperance. Harold insisted on a clause ensuring that Temperance would retain 1/3 ownership of the ranch, regardless of her active participation. "Just in case this partnership doesn't work out," he said gruffly. "A woman needs security." Ross agreed without hesitation, further impressing Temperance with his fairness. As they worked together preparing for the transition, she found herself warming to his practical nature and quiet humor. He treated her as an equal, soliciting her opinions on everything from cattle breeding to crop rotation. "My father never consulted me like this," she admitted one evening as they walked the property, assessing what improvements were needed. Ross glanced at her. "My mother would have boxed my ears if I didn't listen to a woman's perspective. She always said men see half the picture at best." "She sounds remarkable." She was. A shadow passed over his face. "Lost her to influenza 3 years ago. That's when I sold our place in Texas and started working the trails. Couldn't bear to stay there without her." Temperance understood that kind of grief all too well. "And now, are you ready to put down roots again?" "I believe I am." His blue eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them, a tentative connection that left Temperance feeling oddly breathless. 4 days after Ross's arrival, a sleek black carriage pulled up in front of the Porter ranch house. A thin man in an expensive suit stepped down, looking disdainfully at the modest surroundings. Behind him, a much older gentleman emerged, leaning heavily on a silver-topped cane. "Mr. Bartholomew, I presume," Harold said from the porch, where he sat with Ross and Temperance flanking him like sentinels. "Indeed." The older man's gaze fixed on Temperance, appraising her as one might examine merchandise. "And this must be my bride-to-be. Stand up, girl. Let me see you properly." Temperance felt Ross tense beside her, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm as she rose. "Mr. Bartholomew, I'm afraid there's been a change of circumstances." "Change?" His bushy eyebrows drew together. "What nonsense is this? We have a contract, Porter." Harold cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside, gentlemen." The conversation that followed was tense but civil. Harold explained the new arrangement, offering to return Bartholomew's deposit with interest. The businessman was livid, his face reddening alarmingly. "This is outrageous. I've made all the arrangements. Purchased a trousseau, planned the wedding breakfast. You can't simply back out now." Ross, who had remained silent until this point, spoke up. "Mr. Bartholomew, I understand your disappointment, but surely you wouldn't want an unwilling bride." "Willing?" Bartholomew scoffed. "What has that to do with anything? Marriage is a contract, a business arrangement. The girl's feelings are irrelevant." Temperance felt her blood boil. "I am not the girl, sir. I am Temperance Porter, and my feelings are very much relevant to my own life." "Impertinent chit," Bartholomew turned to Harold. "You've raised a willful daughter, Porter. All the more reason she needs a firm hand." "The only thing my daughter needs is respect," Harold replied, surprising Temperance with his sudden defense. "And I was wrong to try to sell her future without consulting her." "This is absurd." Bartholomew rose, leaning on his cane. "I have papers signed by you, Porter, legally binding papers." Ross stood as well, towering over the older man. "About those papers." He reached inside his vest and pulled out the marriage contract Harold had signed. "Mr. Porter has authorized me to return these to you, along with your deposit plus interest." "Where did you get those?" Bartholomew sputtered. "They were in my lawyer's possession." "Your lawyer, Mr. Finch, proved quite reasonable when presented with certain facts about the nature of this arrangement." Ross's voice hardened. "Particularly the fact that Miss Porter is 20 years old and never consented to this marriage." "Consent? She's a woman, for God's sake." Ross's expression darkened, but before he could respond, Temperance stepped forward, her voice steady. "Mr. Bartholomew, let me be perfectly clear. I will never marry you. Not now, not ever. You may take your money and your papers and return to Boston." Bartholomew glared at her, then at Ross, and finally at Harold. "You'll regret this, Porter, all of you." He snatched the papers from Ross's hand. "No one makes a fool of Ezekiel Bartholomew." As his lawyer gathered the funds Harold had prepared, Bartholomew leaned close to Temperance. "You think you've won, girl, but mark my words. That pretty face won't feed you when this cowboy abandons you, as his kind always do." Ross stepped between them, his voice low but carrying a clear threat. "That's enough. Your business here is concluded." After the carriage disappeared in a cloud of dust, Temperance released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Will he cause trouble, do you think?" Ross shook his head. "Men like that prefer to nurse their wounded pride in private." "He'll find another young woman to purchase before the month is out." Harold coughed, a deep, rattling sound that reminded them of the urgency of his situation. "Well, that's done. Now we need to finalize our arrangements, Prescott. I'd like to be on my way to Denver by the end of the week." The following days were a blur of paperwork and preparations. Ross transferred the funds to pay off the bank loans, with the remainder set aside for Harold's medical expenses. Mr. Simmons drew up partnership papers that gave Temperance equal say in ranch decisions, while acknowledging Ross's larger financial stake. "This is highly unusual," the lawyer commented as they signed the documents. "A female business partner with voting rights." "The times are changing, Mr. Simmons," Ross replied, handing Temperance the pen. Best we change with them. On the morning of Harold's departure, Temperance stood beside the stagecoach, fighting back tears as she embraced her father. He seemed smaller somehow, frailer, but there was a peace in his eyes that had been missing for years. "You'll write every week," she insisted, "and follow the doctor's orders to the letter." "Yes, madam," he smiled weakly. "You sound just like your mother." "That's the finest compliment you could give me." Harold turned to Ross, who stood a respectful distance away. "Take care of her, Prescott, and the ranch. Both are precious to me. You have my word, sir." As the stagecoach pulled away, dust swirling in its wake, Temperance felt a curious mixture of sorrow and liberation. For the first time in her adult life, she was neither daughter nor caretaker. She was a woman with a future of her own choosing. Ross seemed to sense her thoughts. "Changes coming fast, aren't they? Like a prairie storm." She looked up at him. "I keep waiting for the fear to set in, but instead I feel ready." He smiled, the expression warming his blue eyes. "That's because you are ready, Miss Porter. You've been running this ranch in all but name for years." "Temperance," she corrected him. "If we're to be partners, you should use my given name." "Temperance." He tested the word. "It suits you, though I've seen little evidence of the restraint it implies." She laughed, surprised by his teasing. "I reserve my temperance for important matters, Mr. Prescott. Running headlong from arranged marriages doesn't qualify." "Ross," he countered, "and I'm mighty glad you ran. Otherwise, I'd be haggling with some other rancher over water rights instead of standing here with you." The warmth in his voice stirred something in Temperance that she promptly tried to ignore. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. The fact that Ross Prescott was handsome, honorable, and treated her as an equal was irrelevant to their partnership. Or so she told herself as they walked back to their house now, to begin the work of transforming the struggling Porter Ranch into a thriving enterprise. The first months of their partnership established a rhythm of shared labor and mutual respect. Ross brought modern ideas about cattle breeding and range management, while Temperance contributed her knowledge of local conditions and markets. They worked from sunrise to sunset, repairing fences, culling the herd, and planting new crops. Letters arrived regularly from Harold, reporting slow but steady improvement in Denver. The clean air and specialized treatments were helping his lungs, though the doctors warned he would never fully recover. He wrote fondly of a widow named Alina who ran the boarding house where he stayed, noting her excellent apple pies with a frequency that made Temperance smile. As summer gave way to autumn, the ranch began to show signs of renewal. Ross had purchased additional cattle, including a prize bull that would improve their stock. The hay harvest was abundant, ensuring feed for the winter. In town, where initial skepticism about their unusual arrangement had been high, attitudes were gradually shifting as the Porter Prescott Ranch began showing signs of prosperity. One evening in late September, Temperance sat on the porch, mending one of Ross's shirts as the sunset painted the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. Ross emerged from the barn, his shirt sleeves rolled up and hay dust clinging to his dark hair. Temperance found her eyes lingering on the strong line of his jaw, the way his smile appeared slowly, starting in his eyes before reaching his lips. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling into the chair beside her. She quickly looked down at her mending. "Just wondering if we should hire more hands for the winter. The Anderson boys will be out of school soon, looking for work." "Good idea. We could use the help with those new cattle." He stretched, his shoulders cracking. "Thought we might ride into town on Saturday. The harvest dance is coming up." Temperance's needle paused mid-stitch. "Oh, figured we should make an appearance. Good for business to be seen participating in community events." Ross kept his tone casual, but there was a questioning note beneath the words. Of course. Very practical. She resumed her sewing, ignoring the flutter in her stomach. For business reasons. Exactly. He cleared his throat. Though I wouldn't be opposed to a dance or two, for appearance's sake. Temperance bit back a smile. For appearance's sake. Saturday arrived clear and crisp, with the first hint of winter in the air. Temperance spent longer than usual preparing for the trip to town, finally selecting her best dress, a deep blue cotton with white trim that her mother had made for her 20th birthday. She pinned up her chestnut hair, allowing a few curls to frame her face, and added a touch of rose water behind her ears. When she emerged from her bedroom, Ross was waiting in the parlor, dressed in clean black trousers and a crisp white shirt. He'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair. The sight of him, so handsome and somehow nervous, made Temperance's heart skip. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes appreciative but respectful. "Thank you. You're quite presentable yourself." The ride to town was filled with light conversation about ranch matters, both of them carefully avoiding any mention of the dance itself. As they approached Lusk, they could hear fiddle music drifting from the town hall, mixing with laughter and the stomping of feet. The hall was decorated with autumn leaves and harvest bounty, lanterns casting a warm glow over the crowded room. Heads turned as Ross and Temperance entered, curious eyes assessing the pair who had caused such a stir months earlier. "Miss Porter, Mr. Prescott." The mayor's wife bustled over, her round face beaming. "We're so pleased you could join us. Everyone's been hoping to see more of you both." Ross tipped his hat. "Wouldn't miss it, Mrs. Dearborn. The Porter Prescott Ranch is proud to be part of this community. And what a fine job you're doing with that place. Harold would be proud to see it now." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "And speaking of Harold, is it true he's been keeping company with a certain Denver lady?" Temperance smiled. "Father mentions an Alina Whitman quite frequently in his letters. They appear to enjoy each other's company." "How lovely. Romance is ageless, don't you think?" Mrs. Dearborn's meaningful glance between Ross and Temperance made her intentions clear. Before either could respond, the older woman was swept away by other guests demanding her attention. "Subtle as a stampede," Ross murmured, his eyes twinkling. "Welcome to small-town life. Everyone considers your business their own." "Well, in that case, we might as well give them something to talk about." Ross offered his hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Porter?" The fiddles were playing a lively reel, couples whirling across the wooden floor in a blur of color and movement. Temperance hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. "I should warn you, I haven't danced in years." "Neither have I. We'll stumble together." But they didn't stumble. Ross led with confidence, his hand warm and steady at her waist, guiding her through the turns and steps as if they'd been dancing together all their lives. Temperance found herself laughing, caught up in the music and the joy of movement. When the dance ended, she was breathless, her cheeks flushed. "You lied, Mr. Prescott. You're an excellent dancer. Only with the right partner." His voice had dropped, intimate despite the crowded room. They danced 3 more times before taking a break for refreshments. As Ross went to fetch them punch, Temperance found herself surrounded by curious neighbors, all eager for details about the ranch and her relationship with Ross. "He's my business partner," she repeated for what felt like the 100th time to Abigail Simmons, the lawyer's daughter. "Business partners don't look at each other the way he looks at you," Abigail said with a knowing smile. "Or dance as if no one else exists." Before Temperance could respond, Ross returned with 2 cups of punch. "Ladies," he greeted the gathered women politely. "I hope you don't mind if I steal my partner away. Mrs. Jeffries was asking about our cattle breeding program. As he led her through the crowd, Temperance whispered, "Thank you for the rescue." "That obvious, was it? You looked like a doe surrounded by wolves. They're just curious." "Apparently, we're the most interesting thing to happen in Lusk since the Wilkins twins were born with 6 toes each." Ross chuckled. "Well, let's satisfy their curiosity with talk of cattle bloodlines. That should cool their romantic speculations." But as the evening wore on, even Temperance had to admit there was something more than partnership growing between them. She felt it in the way his hand lingered on hers, the way his eyes sought her out across the room, the private smiles they shared over the absurdities of small-town gossip. As the final dance was announced, Ross led her onto the floor for a waltz. The fiddles played a sweet, melancholy tune and couples moved in slow circles around them. Ross held her closer than before, his voice low near her ear. "I've been thinking, Temperance. A dangerous pastime," he smiled. "Perhaps, but necessary. These past months working with you, getting to know you, they've meant a great deal to me." Her heart quickened. "They've meant a great deal to me as well. I came to Wyoming looking for land, for a fresh start. I never expected to find someone like you." His blue eyes were serious now. "I know we entered this arrangement as a business matter, but I find myself hoping it might become something more, in time." Temperance swallowed hard. "Ross." The fiddles reached their final notes, and the spell was broken by applause and the shuffling of feet as dancers dispersed. The moment for whatever Temperance might have said passed, leaving an expectant tension between them. The ride home was quiet, both lost in thought under the vast Wyoming sky. Stars blazed overhead and a nearly full moon lit their path. As they approached the ranch, Temperance broke the silence. "What you said earlier, about our arrangement becoming something more." She kept her eyes on the road ahead. "I would not be opposed to exploring that possibility." Ross reined in his horse, turning to face her. "You mean that?" "I do." She met his gaze steadily, but slowly. "We're still learning each other, and I've only just gained my independence. I'm not ready to surrender it, even to someone I care for." "I would never ask you to surrender anything, Temperance. That's not the kind of partnership I want in business or in life." The sincerity in his voice warmed her more than any declaration of passion could have. "Then I believe we understand each other." "We do." He smiled, that slow smile that began in his eyes. "And we have all the time in the world." Winter descended on Wyoming with its usual ferocity, blanketing the ranch in snow and ice. The work was harder in the cold months, breaking frozen water troughs, ensuring the cattle had access to feed, maintaining the buildings against the relentless wind. But there was also a peaceful quality to the season, with long evenings spent by the fire, reading or talking or simply existing in comfortable silence. Ross and Temperance moved cautiously in their evolving relationship. A touch of hands passing the coffee pot, a lingering glance across the dinner table, occasional rides together to check the herd when one person could have managed alone. Small moments that built a foundation of trust and affection. Letters from Harold continued to arrive, though less frequently as the snow made mail delivery challenging. He reported continued improvement in his health and increasing fondness for Alina Whitman. "A remarkable woman," he wrote. "Reminds me of your mother in her practical wisdom, though Alina has a mischievous streak that would have shocked your sainted mama." In January, a blizzard swept across the territory, trapping Ross and Temperance in the house for 3 days. They passed the time inventorying supplies, planning spring plantings, and playing endless games of checkers. On the second night, as wind howled around the eaves, Ross shared stories of his childhood in Texas, of his mother's strength after his father's death, of his dreams for the future. I always wanted a family, he admitted, staring into the fire. A wife who was also a friend, children to teach and learn from, a legacy beyond just the land. Temperance, curled in the chair opposite, felt her heart expand at the simple honesty of his words. That's a beautiful dream. What about you? What did you want before life got in the way? She considered the question. I never thought much beyond this ranch. It was always my world, my future. But I did dream of having a voice in that future, of being heard and valued for my mind as well as my hands. She glanced at him. You've given me that, a voice. You always had a voice, Temperance. I just had sense enough to listen. The blizzard ended, but something had shifted between them, a deeper understanding that made their daily interactions more meaningful. By February, the entire town of Lusk had decided they were courting, despite their protestations that they were simply business partners. Might as well admit it, Ross said one evening as they returned from church, where the preacher had unsubtly included them in a sermon about Ruth and Boaz. They'll think what they want regardless, Temperance laughed. I suppose you're right. Does it bother you, the speculation? Not at all. He helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. Does it bother you? She looked up at him, struck again by the openness of his expression, the warmth in his blue eyes. No, she said softly. It doesn't bother me. March brought the first signs of spring, patches of grass emerging from melting snow, the return of birds, longer days filled with light and promise. With the thaw came a flurry of activity as they prepared for calving season, one of the busiest and most critical times on a cattle ranch. Ross hired the Anderson boys and 2 other local youths to help, but the work still required long hours from both partners. Temperance often found herself in the barn at midnight, helping a heifer through a difficult birth, Ross at her side with quiet competence. It was during one such night, exhausted but triumphant after successfully delivering twin calves, that everything changed between them. They sat side by side on a hay bale, watching the mother cow nuzzle her newborns, their shoulders touching in the chilly barn. Beautiful, isn't it? Temperance whispered, not wanting to disturb the peaceful scene. New life. Ross nodded, then turned to look at her. By lantern light, her face was soft, tendrils of hair escaping from her braid, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. To him, she had never been more beautiful. Temperance, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I love you. The words hung between them, simple and profound. Temperance's breath caught as she met his gaze, seeing the vulnerability there, the hope. I love you too, she replied, the truth of it washing through her like a spring flood. I think I have for some time now. Ross reached out, gently brushing his thumb across her cheek to remove the dirt smudge. Then, with infinite care, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was a tender kiss, a question as much as a declaration, and Temperance answered by sliding her arms around his neck, drawing him closer. When they finally broke apart, Ross pressed his forehead to hers. I've been wanting to do that since the harvest dance. Why did you wait so long? I needed you to be sure, to know your own mind and heart without pressure. He touched her face again, reverent. Your independence matters to me, Temperance. Your choice matters. Tears pricked her eyes at his understanding. You are nothing like the future that was decided for me. You are everything I would have chosen if I'd known to dream so boldly. They stayed in the barn until dawn, talking and planning and occasionally kissing, as the twin calves found their feet and began to explore their new world. By the time they returned to the house, hand in hand, they had decided to marry in June, after calving season but before the summer cattle drive. The news spread through Lusk like wildfire, met with knowing smiles and claims of "I told you so" from nearly every quarter. Mrs. Dearborn immediately appointed herself unofficial wedding planner. offering the town hall for the reception and promising to organize a quilt-making circle as a wedding gift. Harold's response arrived by telegram. Delighted stop Eleanor and I will attend stop have news of our own stop letter follows the letter, when it arrived, brought joyful tidings. Harold and Eleanor had married in a quiet ceremony in Denver. His health had improved enough that the doctors believed he could return to Wyoming, not to work but to live comfortably in retirement. Eleanor, a widow with a modest inheritance of her own, had suggested they purchase a small house in town, close enough to visit the ranch regularly but maintaining their independence. "Your father has found happiness again," Ross said as they read the letter together. "Just as you have." "As we both have," Temperance corrected, squeezing his hand. "It seems the Porter women have a talent for finding good men, even if we take unconventional paths to do so." Spring progressed into early summer, the ranch flourishing under their care. The calves grew strong, the crops emerged in neat rows, and preparations for the wedding continued amid the daily work. Temperance found herself humming as she tended the vegetable garden or rode the fences with Ross, a contentment she had never expected to find. One afternoon in late May, as they were discussing which fields to plant with winter wheat, a cloud of dust on the horizon announced an approaching rider. Ross shaded his eyes against the sun. "Looks like the mail carrier." But as the rider drew closer, Temperance recognized the sleek black horse and rigid posture of a man she had hoped never to see again. "It's not the mail, it's Mr. Bartholomew's lawyer." Mr. Finch dismounted with a grimace, brushing dust from his expensive suit. "Miss Porter, Mr. Prescott." His tone was coldly professional. "I bring correspondence from my employer." He handed Ross an official-looking envelope, then remounted without waiting for a response. "Good day to you both." As the lawyer rode away, Ross and Temperance exchanged worried glances before opening the letter. Inside was a formal legal document and a brief note in an elegant hand. "My dear Miss Porter, I trust this finds you well, though perhaps not for long. Enclosed you will find a notice of claim against your property based on an unpaid promissory note signed by your father some years ago. As the current owner, you are now liable for this debt, which with interest amounts to a considerable sum more, I suspect, than your charming little ranch can afford. Consider this my wedding gift. Yours truly, Ezekiel Bartholomew." Ross examined the promissory note, his expression grim. "This appears legitimate. Your father borrowed a substantial amount from Bartholomew 6 years ago with the ranch as collateral. According to this, the loan was due in full last month. But that's impossible. Papa never mentioned this." Temperance's mind raced. "And why would Bartholomew wait until now to collect, unless it's revenge?" Ross folded the papers carefully. "He's been waiting for the right moment to strike. Can he do this? Take the ranch if the debt is valid, yes. We'd need to pay it in full within 30 days or face foreclosure." Ross rubbed his jaw, thinking. "We should ride into town, speak with Mr. Simmons, and telegraph your father he might remember details about this loan." The news from both sources was discouraging. Mr. Simmons confirmed that the promissory note appeared legally binding, and Harold admitted in a hastily sent telegram that he had indeed borrowed from Bartholomew years earlier, during a particularly bad drought. "I thought it was settled when I agreed to the marriage arrangement," Harold wrote. "Bartholomew implied the debt would be forgiven as part of the dowry. There was nothing in writing to that effect, but his word seemed sufficient at the time." "A deliberate trap," Ross said grimly as they rode back to the ranch that evening. "He never intended to forgive the debt, just held it in reserve in case things didn't go his way." Temperance's stomach churned with anxiety. "The amount with interest, we don't have that kind of money, Ross." Not without selling most of the herd, and even then. We're not selling anything. His voice was firm. And we're not losing this ranch, not after everything we've built together. But how can we possibly pay? I don't know yet. But I promise you, Temperance, I will find a way. Over the next 2 weeks, Ross exhausted every possibility. He approached the bank in Lusk, but they were unwilling to extend such a large loan against property that might soon be in legal jeopardy. He wrote to his former employer in Texas, a wealthy cattle baron who might have the resources to help, but received no immediate response. He even considered selling his own inheritance, a small parcel of land in Texas that had been his mother's, but the process would take months, far longer than the 30-day deadline. As the deadline approached, Ross became increasingly withdrawn, spending long hours riding the range alone or poring over account books in search of money that simply wasn't there. Temperance watched him with growing concern, her heart breaking at the burden he carried. "Ross," she said one evening, finding him slumped at the kitchen table staring at Bartholomew's letter, "this isn't your fight alone." He looked up, exhaustion etched in his face. "I promised I'd protect you, protect the ranch. I've failed." "No." She pulled up a chair beside him, taking his hands in hers. "You haven't failed. Bartholomew is using underhanded tactics to punish us for defying him. The failure is his moral character, not your protection. But the ranch is just land and buildings." She squeezed his hands. "Important, yes. My heritage, yes. But not worth your suffering like this. If we lose it, we'll start again somewhere else, together." Ross stared at her, wonder replacing some of the despair in his eyes. "You would leave here, the only home you've ever known. For you, yes." The certainty in her voice surprised even herself. "Home isn't this house or these fields, Ross. It's wherever we build our life together." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I don't deserve you, Temperance Porter." "Good thing you're marrying me, then. You'll have a lifetime to earn me." The next morning, as they sat discussing their limited options over breakfast, the sound of approaching horses drew them to the porch. To their astonishment, a familiar black carriage led the procession, followed by several riders and a second, more modest carriage. "Bartholomew," Ross muttered, instinctively moving to stand in front of Temperance. "What the devil does he want? The deadline isn't for another week." Ezekiel Bartholomew descended from his carriage with the help of his driver, his aged face set in smug satisfaction. Behind him, Mr. Finch and 2 other men dismounted while the second carriage remained at a distance. "Good morning, Miss Porter. Mr. Prescott." Bartholomew's voice carried across the yard. "I trust you've had time to consider your situation." Ross stepped forward. "We still have a week to settle the debt, Bartholomew. Why are you here? I thought I'd save you the suspense." The older man smiled coldly. "And witness firsthand the consequences of defying me." Temperance moved to stand beside Ross, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We intend to honor the debt, Mr. Bartholomew. We've been exploring options to raise the funds." "How enterprising of you." "But I'm afraid it's too late for that." He gestured to Mr. Finch, who produced a sheaf of papers. "I've spoken with Judge Matthews in Cheyenne. Given the circumstances and your, shall we say, limited resources, he's agreed to expedite the foreclosure process. These papers authorize immediate seizure of the property in lieu of payment." Ross took the papers, scanning them quickly. "This can't be legal." "I assure you it is. The judge is an old friend, very understanding of a gentleman's position when dealing with frontier difficulties." Bartholomew's gaze flicked dismissively over the ranch. "My men will begin the inventory immediately. You have until sundown to remove your personal belongings." White-hot anger surged through Temperance. "This is our home, our livelihood. You can't simply take it because your pride was wounded. On the contrary, Miss Porter, I can and will. His thin lips curved in a smile. Consider it a lesson in the realities of the world. Those with power and wealth make the rules. Those without. He shrugged. Well, they learn to obey. Ross took a step toward Bartholomew, his hands clenched at his sides. The older man's companions moved protectively closer, hands hovering near their weapons. Easy, cowboy, Bartholomew taunted. Violence will only complicate your situation. For a moment, tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Then, to everyone's surprise, the door of the second carriage opened, and a distinguished-looking man in his 60s emerged, followed by a younger man carrying a briefcase. I believe I've heard enough, the older man called, striding forward with purpose. Ezekiel, you always did have a flair for the dramatic. Bartholomew's face drained of color. Governor, what are you doing here? Governor Thaddeus Ainsworth, recently elected to lead the Wyoming Territory, approached the group with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to command. I was visiting Cheyenne when the most curious legal matter was brought to my attention. A respected judge suddenly expediting a foreclosure without proper process, at the behest of a Boston businessman with no ties to our territory. He glanced at the papers in Ross's hand. May I? Ross handed over the documents, confusion evident on his face. The governor examined them briefly before passing them to his companion. My legal secretary agrees with my assessment. These papers constitute an abuse of judicial authority. He turned to Bartholomew. Did you really think you could manipulate our territorial justice system for a personal vendetta? This is a private business matter, Bartholomew sputtered. You have no right to interfere. When the integrity of our courts is compromised, it becomes very much my concern. The governor's voice hardened, especially when it threatens citizens of Wyoming who contribute to our economy and community. Temperance stepped forward. Governor Ainsworth, we appreciate your concern, but there is a legitimate debt. My father did borrow the money. So I understand. Mr. Prescott explained the situation in his letter. The governor smiled kindly at her confusion. Yes, Miss Porter, your fiancé wrote to my office last week, not seeking intervention in the debt itself, but questioning the legality of the accelerated foreclosure. Ross looked equally surprised. I never expected you to come personally, sir. Sometimes matters require a personal touch. The governor turned back to Bartholomew. Now then, the debt stands, but the methods of collection must follow proper legal channels. Miss Porter and Mr. Prescott will have their full 30 days, after which if the debt remains unpaid, normal foreclosure proceedings may begin. Is that understood? Bartholomew's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. This is outrageous. I demand. You are in no position to demand anything, sir. The governor's voice cut like steel. In fact, I believe Judge Matthews will be very interested to hear how his name was used in this matter. I suspect the documents you presented were not authorized by him at all. Mr. Finch shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his employer's gaze. Bartholomew, seeing his lawyer's reaction, seemed to deflate slightly. Now, the governor continued, I suggest you return to Cheyenne and await the proper resolution of this matter. Unless you'd prefer to discuss potential charges of attempting to defraud Wyoming citizens. With a final glare of impotent rage, Bartholomew signaled to his men and limped back to his carriage. This isn't over, he hissed as he passed Ross and Temperance. One way or another I will have satisfaction. As the black carriage departed, Governor Ainsworth turned to the stunned couple. Well, that was invigorating. I haven't faced down a bully since my schoolyard days. Ross found his voice first. Governor, We can't thank you enough for your intervention, but the debt is still valid. We still have to find the money within the month. Actually, that brings me to the second reason for my visit. The governor gestured to his carriage. I believe I have someone who might help with that particular problem. To their astonishment, Harold Porter emerged from the carriage, followed by a handsome older woman with silver-streaked auburn hair. "Papa!" Temperance cried, rushing forward to embrace her father. "What are you doing here?" "Your health is much improved, as you can see." Harold hugged her tightly, then shook Ross's hand. The Denver air worked wonders, or perhaps it was Aliner's care. He smiled fondly at the woman beside him. "May I present my wife, Aliner Whitman Porter?" After warm introductions were exchanged, the governor suggested they move the conversation inside, away from the heat. Around the kitchen table, over coffee prepared by Temperance, Harold explained his unexpected arrival. "When I received your telegram about Bartholomew's claim, I remembered something important. The original loan agreement had a clause if the money was used for specific improvements to increase the ranch's value, a portion of the debt would be forgiven. But we never made those improvements," Temperance said. "The money went to survive the drought." "Yes, but Bartholomew doesn't know that. There was no accounting requirement, just my word, and there's no way to prove now where the money went." Ross leaned forward. "You're suggesting we claim the improvements were made. I'm suggesting we make them now, quickly, and backdate the work." Harold's eyes held a spark of mischief that Temperance hadn't seen in years. "Aliner has connections in Denver. Her late husband was in construction. She can help us obtain the necessary materials and documentation." Aliner nodded. "My brother owns a lumber mill. He can provide receipts showing orders from several years ago. And I know men who can work quickly, good men who understand the importance of creative record-keeping." Governor Ainsworth cleared his throat. "As a public official, I should pretend I didn't hear this conversation. However, as a private citizen, I might observe that Ezekiel Bartholomew's business practices throughout the territories have been ethically questionable at best. Fighting fire with fire seems appropriate." Temperance looked at Ross, seeing her own moral conflict reflected in his eyes. "It's not entirely honest," she said slowly. "Neither was Bartholomew implying the debt would be forgiven as part of your dowry," Harold pointed out, "or attempting to seize the property through fraudulent court papers. We wouldn't be fabricating the debt reduction clause," Ross reasoned. "That exists in the original agreement. We'd just be retroactively complying with it." The governor stood, placing his hat on his head. "I believe my official business here is concluded. The improper foreclosure has been halted, and the legal process will proceed as it should." He winked at Temperance. "Whatever private arrangements you make regarding the debt are, of course, not my concern." After the governor departed, promising to send word if Bartholomew attempted any further legal manipulations, the 4 remaining adults spent hours developing their plan. Aliner's connections would provide materials and men. Harold's knowledge of the original agreement would guide the necessary improvements. Ross and Temperance would handle the practical aspects of making the changes appear long established. "It's still a considerable sum, even with the reduction clause," Ross noted. "But between what we have saved and what Aliner can loan us, we should manage it." "And I've brought another resource," Harold added. "The modest inheritance my father left me. I never touched it, even in the worst times. I always planned for it to be Temperance's dowry someday." "Papa, are you sure? What about your medical expenses? Aliner and I are comfortable. Her husband left her well provided for." He squeezed his new wife's hand. "Besides, what better use for a dowry than saving the home you'll share with the man you love?" Work began immediately. Aliner's brother arrived from Denver with lumber and supplies, accompanied by skilled carpenters. They reinforced the barn, added a new wing to the main house, and constructed a system of irrigation ditches that appeared weathered and established. Harold, though unable to do physical labor, supervised the paperwork, creating a meticulous record of past improvements that would satisfy even the most skeptical examiner. Throughout this whirlwind of activity, Temperance found herself drawing closer to her father, truly understanding him for the first time. His desperate arrangements with Bartholomew, while misguided, had been born of love and fear for her future. Seeing him now with Aliner, happy and purposeful despite his illness, healed wounds Temperance hadn't realized were still raw. "I'm sorry I tried to sell your future," Harold said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I should have trusted you more. And I should have understood your fears better." She leaned her head against his shoulder as she had as a child. "We both did the best we could with what we knew at the time. You found a good man in Ross, better than any I could have chosen for you." "Because you didn't choose him for me, Papa. I chose him for myself, and he chose me knowing all my stubbornness and pride." Harold chuckled. "God help him." 10 days before the debt deadline, they received word that Bartholomew was returning to Lusk with an independent assessor to evaluate the improvements claimed under the reduction clause. Ross had anticipated this move and made sure every detail was in place. Aged wood treated to look weathered. New construction disguised with techniques that mimicked years of exposure to the elements. Documentation organized and convincing. When Bartholomew's carriage arrived, followed by a wagon carrying a thin, spectacled man introduced as Mr. Greeley, the expert assessor, Temperance and Ross were ready. They greeted their visitors with calm politeness, offering no hint of their anxiety. "I trust you're prepared to pay the debt in full," Bartholomew said without preamble. "I've heard rumors of some claim about improvement reductions, but I assure you, Mr. Greeley is not easily fooled." "We're prepared to honor all legitimate obligations," Ross replied evenly. "And we welcome Mr. Greeley's expert assessment of the improvements made with your loan funds." The inspection was thorough and tense. Mr. Greeley meticulously examined each structure, consulted the documentation, and asked pointed questions about construction methods and materials. Temperance held her breath each time he paused to make notes or peer more closely at a join or foundation. By late afternoon, the assessment was complete. Mr. Greeley conferred privately with Bartholomew, whose expression grew increasingly thunderous as they spoke. Finally, the assessor approached Ross and Temperance. "Based on my evaluation, the improvements specified in the reduction clause have indeed been implemented. Some years ago, judging by the weathering and settling, very solid work." He adjusted his spectacles. "According to the terms of the original agreement, this reduces the debt by 40%. "This is absurd," Bartholomew exploded. "These improvements were not made when the loan was issued. They're recent they must be." Mr. Greeley looked offended. "Sir, I have 30 years of experience in construction assessment. The irrigation system alone shows at least 5 years of soil erosion patterns. The barn extension has weathered consistent with the original structure, unless you're suggesting I don't know my business." Bartholomew's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Temperance stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Bartholomew, we are prepared to pay the adjusted amount in full today. Mr. Simmons has the funds in escrow and can transfer them immediately in exchange for a document acknowledging the debt as satisfied. I refuse. This is clearly a conspiracy to defraud me." Bartholomew turned to Mr. Greeley. "How much did they pay you for this false report?" The assessor drew himself up indignantly. "I have never been so insulted in my professional career. Governor Ainsworth himself recommended me for this position because of my impartiality. If you question my integrity, perhaps we should discuss the matter with him directly." The mention of the governor seemed to drain the last fight from Bartholomew. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment he looked every one of his 70 years. "Very well," he muttered. "The reduced amount, but I want it in cash today with the transfer witnessed by Mr. Finch." Ross nodded. "We'll ride into town immediately and complete the transaction at the bank." As Bartholomew turned to leave, Temperance called after him. "Mr. Bartholomew," he paused, looking back with undisguised contempt. "I am sorry that things unfolded this way. I hope you find happiness in Boston." For a brief moment, something like regret flickered across the old man's face. Then his expression hardened again. "You've won this round, Miss Porter. But remember, in this world, a woman without a powerful man's protection is always vulnerable. Your cowboy won't live forever." "Neither will you, sir," she replied softly. "And I'd rather face uncertainty with love than security with resentment." After the bank transaction was completed and Bartholomew departed for Cheyenne, and presumably Boston thereafter, Ross and Temperance returned to the ranch with the debt satisfaction papers clutched firmly in hand. Harold and Alina were waiting on the porch, faces anxious. "It's done," Ross announced, lifting Temperance off the wagon and spinning her around in jubilation. "The ranch is free and clear." Celebrations lasted well into the night, with Harold proposing toast after toast, until Alina gently reminded him of his health. As the older couple retired to the guest room, Ross pulled Temperance onto the porch, beneath a sky blazing with stars. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I've been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He produced a small velvet pouch and emptied its contents into her palm, a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained. "She made me promise to give it only to a woman as strong and loving as she was. I found that woman in you, Temperance." Tears blurred her vision as he took the ring and slipped it onto her finger. "With this ring, I'm asking you properly, with no business arrangements or practical considerations. Will you marry me because you love me as I love you?" "Yes," she whispered, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. 1,000 times yes. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony in the town church, with Harold proudly walking his daughter down the aisle. Alina stood as matron of honor, and Governor Ainsworth himself attended, bringing news that Judge Matthews had been removed from the bench for accepting bribes from Bartholomew in multiple cases. The reception was held at the ranch, where neighbors and friends gathered to celebrate not just the marriage but the preservation of one of Lusk's oldest homesteads. Mrs. Dearborn presented them with the promised quilt, sewn by the women of the town, and emblazoned with the newly designed Porter Prescott brand. As evening fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Ross led Temperance away from the crowd to a quiet spot beneath the old oak tree where generations of Porters had carved their initials. He produced a pocket knife and handed it to her. "Your turn to leave your mark," he said. As a Porter and now a Prescott, Temperance carefully carved TPP beneath her father's and grandfather's initials, then handed the knife to Ross, who added his own RP beside hers. "A new chapter in the ranch's history," she said, tracing the fresh cuts with her fingertip. "The best chapter yet." He drew her into his arms. "When I rode into Wyoming, I was looking for land, for a place to build something lasting. I never expected to find someone who would make that place a home. And I never imagined that fighting for my independence would lead me to the one person I'd willingly share my life with." She smiled up at him. My future was decided without asking me, but you tore up those papers and asked what I wanted. And what do you want, Temperance Prescott? Now and for all our tomorrows. She wrapped her arms around his neck, the diamond on her finger catching the last light of day. This, you, our ranch, the family we'll build together. Everything I never dared to dream for myself. As Ross lowered his lips to hers, sealing their vows with a kiss more binding than any legal document, Temperance knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in the land or the buildings, but in the love of the man who had given her the freedom to choose her own destiny. 5 years later, the Porter Prescott Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the territory. The original herd had tripled in size, their breeding stock was sought after throughout the region, and the farmland produced abundant harvests. Ross and Temperance had expanded the main house to accommodate their growing family, 4-year-old Harold James, called Harry, and 2-year-old twin girls, Margaret and Alina. Harold Porter had passed peacefully the previous winter, having lived long enough to bounce his grandchildren on his knee and see the ranch flourish beyond his wildest dreams. Alina remained in their small house in town, a frequent visitor who delighted in spoiling her step-grandchildren. On a warm summer evening, as the children played in the yard under Alina's watchful eye, Ross found Temperance standing on the rise overlooking their property, her face tilted toward the setting sun. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Prescott," he said, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. She leaned back against his chest, content. "I was thinking about choices, the ones made for us, the ones we make ourselves, and how the difference shapes everything that follows. Any regrets?" He nestled his chin on her shoulder. "Not one." She turned in his arms to face him, her eyes reflecting the same love he'd first seen in that lined shack during a storm, now deepened by years of partnership in all things. "Every challenge we've faced together. Every joy has been sweeter for sharing it with you." From the yard below, Harry's delighted squeal rose as Alina chased him around the oak tree, the twins toddling behind on chubby legs. Ross smiled at the scene, then looked back at his wife, still as beautiful to him as the day they met. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about that north pasture. If we expand the irrigation there, we could double the hay production next season." Temperance laughed. "Always planning, Mr. Prescott, always looking to the horizon. With you beside me, how could I not? The future looks mighty promising from where I stand." As the sun dipped below the Wyoming mountains, painting the land in gold and shadow, Ross and Temperance walked hand in hand back to their home. Their children, their life built choice by choice, day by day, out of love and respect and the freedom to decide their own destiny. And in the years that followed, whenever young couples in Lusk faced opposition or arranged marriages or futures decided by others, they would hear the story of Temperance Porter and the cowboy who tore up the papers and asked what she wanted, a story that became legend in Wyoming territory, a testament to the power of choice and the enduring strength of love freely given.